Good day, Council. Welcome to Recognition and Enforcement of Foreign Judgments. Now, I did mention at the onset of this course that conflict of laws is divided up into three parts. We have jurisdiction and its related principles, of firsts of law, and we have recognition and enforcement of foreign judgments. What that basically means is that we have actually come to the end of the course. And this topic is the last topic in the conflict of law or the private international law era. So if you are receiving this lesson, basically means that we're concluding the course, and at this point in time is for us to cap it all up so that we understand properly how conflict of law works. Now, recognition and enforcement of foreign judgments is a concept of private international law that aids courts in doing the final deeds of recognizing and enforcing a judgment that was passed by another court. Now, the purposes of every resolution mechanism is to ensure that it reaches a resolution. It is there to ensure that the dispute that was in existence has been resolved. That is the purpose of every resolution mechanism, either be it litigation or an alternative mode of resolution. The end game is to make sure that the dispute that was there is no longer there. That's the principle of recognition and enforcement of foreign judgment. Is there to ensure that there is finality in the resolution of a particular dispute. It is primarily rooted in comity. That is, it is based off the principle of reciprocity. The common law view of recognition and enforcement of foreign judgment is based off the principles of comity, whereby countries recognizing each other's legal systems as being valid, independent, as being legal systems that have reached the position of legitimacy, recognizes the decisions that have been made by other jurisdictions or each other's jurisdictions, and from there enforces it within its countries or within its state. For example, Zambia and Malawi have recognized each other's countries as being in common law, that is, as being legitimate. And thus, Zambia agrees that in a situation where Malawi has dealt with a case in its territory, and it involves a Zambian citizen, and all issues are revolving around the principles of private international law, Zambia can recognize the legitimacy of that particular decision and proceed to enforce the judgment using various medias of enforcement that are in existence within our national laws. For example, issues relating to a writ of FIFA, a writ of illegity, and all of those other modes of enforcement of the judgment that are there in existence. Now, this is the basis upon which recognition and enforcement of foreign judgment talks to. So when you say recognition, what are you saying? You're basically saying the judgment that has been made by another court is legitimate. And not only that, that particular judgment has been made by a competent court. This competent court has applied the law very well. And because of this, we recognize the decision. And because we recognize the decision, and it is involving a person who's resident in this particular jurisdiction, we can now take up the matter and proceed to enforce. Because one of the areas that are very, very strict and very technical when it comes to any judgment is the issue of enforcement. So after a judgment has been recognized to be valid, that has been recognized to be legitimate, a country now will take it up from there and enforce the judgment. Instead of having to go through litigation once more, the judgment that has been made by another court will basically just be recognized, and the court which is recognized in that particular judgment will proceed now to take up the matter and enforce it. So, and in common law, we're saying it is based off the principle of comity, and you will see how that is in fact treated. Now, there are key things that needs to be taken into consideration as far as the recognition and enforcement of foreign judgment is concerned. The 5 things that are displayed on your screen right now are the things that need to be taken into consideration. Firstly, the nature of the cause must lie in civil law, which basically means that the matter is not one that is lying within public law. Public law cases can be cases revolving around the interpretation of the Constitution, criminal law. All of those are public law cases. And the matters that we've dealt with here in conflict of laws are all falling within civil law. Tort, contract, marriages, all of those are part and parcel of the civil law branch. So the nature of the case that is being dealt with should in fact arise from civil law. It should not be one that is arising from public law. The judgment is also supposed to be taken into consideration. If we say the judgment is supposed to be a judgment debt, it basically means that the issue revolving around recognition and enforcement of foreign judgment is one that is involving money. It must be a monetary judgment. And you will see later on when you look at the authorities, that they're talking to money judgments. So there should be an existence of a judgment debt, not where a party, of course, suffering a tort, goes to court and asks for an apology or asks for an injunction. That particular decision is not going to be recognized and enforced. It can only be dealt with in the case where it was heard, and enforcement is going to happen just right there and then. But if you're to go a step further into commencing recognition and enforcement proceedings, it must be one that is involving a money judgment. Thirdly, public policy should be considered. In the country where you're taking the matter to be enforced, is it in the public interest that that particular judgment is enforced or that particular case is recognized? For example, if you're dealing with cases revolving around the dissolution of property, of course, in monetary reform of a couple who's gay, can it be registered here in Zambia? Of course not. This is against our public policy. So public policy is a very big consideration as far as the recognition and enforcement of foreign judgment is concerned. Further than that, justice. Will it be in the interest of justice if that particular judgment is recognized and enforced? Of course, justice talks to fairness. Justice talks to equal treatment. Justice talks to fair treatment and equity. So are those issues being taken into consideration as far as justice is concerned? If you're going to be recognizing and enforcing a foreign judgment, will it be to the promotion of justice? And lastly, jurisdiction of the deciding state. Did the state that decided the matter, did the court that decided the matter have jurisdiction over the case? If a matter is brought before a Russian court and the Russian court did not have jurisdiction from the start, can that particular decision be recognized and enforced? Of course not. It must be taken into consideration. There are various cases here in Zambia, for example, that are stuck to jurisdiction. For example, in the Sevenda management case, the court did allude to the fact that a court cannot give a remedy that it does not have. Basically speaking to the idea that if you don't have the powers to make the order or make the decision, then you will not be able to give the judgment or give the remedy that's been sought for. So this is why it is very important that a court that is passing the decision or a court that is giving the remedy had from the start jurisdiction or authority or power, as you may refer to it, to handle the matter. So the jurisdiction that is needed to be considered firstly is the one that is conferred upon the court that is deciding the matter. So that is jurisdiction of the deciding state. These 5 considerations must be met if that particular judgment is to be recognized and enforced in a foreign nation. Now that is talked to. Here in Zambia, we have an act, the Foreign Judgment Reciprocal Enforcement Act, Chapter 76 of the Laws of Zambia. This is the principal legislative act that regulates recognition and enforcement of a foreign judgment here in Zambia. It is principal, very, very important. When you talk about recognition and enforcement of foreign judgments in Zambia, it is the main act. Now, here's the key. When you are dealing with recognition and enforcement of foreign judgments, you can either have this act with you or know the Chiluba case, because the principles that are in the Chiluba case are basically recognized as well in the Foreign Judgment Reciprocal Enforcement Act. This act is very, very important. Now, as we have been talking about conflict of laws, and as we have talked about English laws and everything else, even this act is quite important. So if you've considered all of the things that we've discussed, all of the things that we've dealt with, this is the only act that we've come across that is in fact applicable to the course. And because you're doing conflict of laws in Zambia, this act becomes very, very important for your consideration. Now, what parts of the act should you talk to, or should you refer yourself to? Firstly, Section 2. What exactly is under Section 2? This is where you find the interpretation section. Now, under Section 2, of interest to you is the definition of what is known as a judgment. Now, if you look at the definition of a judgment in the Act, you will find that it restricts itself to a money judgment. Let me quote verbatim. Section 2, the interpretation of judgment is as follows. It means a judgment or order given or made by a court in any civil proceedings, or a judgment or order given or made by a court in any criminal proceedings for the payment of a sum of money in respect of compensation or damages to an injured party. The definition itself is restricting judgments to be made within what is known as a money judgment. If it is not a money judgment, it can't be recognized and enforced. So here, if you're talking about judgment, you're talking about a money judgment, one that is involving money. That's the first thing. Secondly, it also defines who a judgment debtor is and who a judgment creditor is for the purposes of direction. If you're a judgment debtor, what does it mean? It basically means that you're the person against whom the judgment was given. So you have lost the case. You're a judgment debtor. You're the one who's supposed to pay. And the person who you're supposed to pay is called a judgment creditor. So who's making the application for enforcement? The judgment creditor through their lawyers. And then the judgment debtor is the person whose enforcement is going to be taken against. So these two definitions are very, very important. The other one is that it defines registration and register in court. Registration basically means that which is undertaken under Part 2 of the Act. And the register in court, the court that has been given this particular power is the High Court. So the register in court in relation to foreign judgments is the High Court, meaning that whenever you're going to proceed to register, you should proceed before the High Court. Part 2 starts with Section 3, which talks about the registration of foreign judgments. The registration of foreign judgments. The president, who has been given the authority by this particular act, has been conferred with the powers to extend the jurisdiction of the High Court. Now remember, if you remember your procedure properly, you're going to realize that generally the High Court's authority is bound to the territorial limitations of the country. That is the authority of the High Court. So the High Court here in Zambia, irrespective of where it is found, whether in Kawe, in Ndola, in Lusaka, it is restricted within the boundaries of Zambia. That is in civil proceedings. There is no extraterritoriality or extraterritorial jurisdiction of the High Court of Zambia in civil proceedings, unless in criminal proceedings. That's the need for extension according to the Act. So if you want to register the foreign judgment, there firstly must be an administrative act undertaken by the government to extend the jurisdiction of the High Court, giving it power to register the decision that was made by a foreign court. So when the extension is being made by the president is going to extend it specifically to the country where this particular case was heard. For example, if the Malawan court was the court that heard the judgment, before you even commence proceedings for enforcement, you must ensure that there is that particular link that has been created through the extension of the authority of the High Court by the president. After that extension has been made, that is when now you can apply for the recognition and enforcement of a foreign judgment. So firstly, you do what? You register the foreign judgment. After the registration has been done, then a date is going to be set for you to proceed with enforcement proceedings. Okay, so this is further explained that the extension should be made through a statutory order, for this is an administrative order that is specifically reserved for the president, and the extension can also be revoked by the president. This is provided for under section 3.4. Then examples of some of the extensions that have been made is has been given to you. One extension that has been made is the judgment Reciprocal Enforcement, Gilbert and Ellis Island Colony. These were made to the colonies for Zambia, to a British Solomon Island Protectorate Order. All of these are some of the examples of the extensions that were made at the passing of this act. So if you look at the back of the act, you would find these extensions as your examples. Further to that, the act also defines the nature, or talks to the nature of the judgment. Section 3, subsection 2 talks to the nature of the judgment. So like I said, it should be a mandatory judgment. It should be a mandatory judgment. So in the country where the case is being heard, it should be a conclusive and final judgment, which basically means that there's no further appeal. So the highest court in the land where the case was heard should have made the decision conclusively and finally. There's no other court where the case can be appealed to. So for example, if the case was in the High Court of Malawi, for you to apply for recognition and enforcement, you must make sure that the Supreme Court of Malawi, if that is the highest court of the land, has heard that case and has decided in favor of the judgment creditor, or the judgment creditor, yes, who enforces the judgment. So it must be conclusive and final. The other category is that it must be for a payable sum of money, that is compensation or damages as was defined in the interpretation section. And then it must be given after the commencement of the order directing that this part shall extend. So that particular judgment should be passed after the commencement of the order. So the order will be applied for, and then the order will be applied for, and then the judgment is now going to be recognized and enforced or registered. We have two very, very important cases. One is the Netanyendea versus Kenneth Paul Spooner, appeal number 21 of 2009. In this particular case, what is important to remember is what was stated by Tomba JS, as he was then, where he stated that, firstly, a court may register, a party may register if the registrar in court thinks it is just and convenient, of course, talking to justice. Registration is not a right, as it is at the discretion of the registrar in court, of course, talking to the idea that the High Court can refuse to register that particular judgment. You cannot be registered unless it's a money judgment, like I was saying in the Act, and then registration is prohibited if the deciding court acted without jurisdiction. Like I was saying, a court cannot give you a remedy that it does not have. So a court cannot give you what it doesn't have. So if it did not have jurisdiction at the start of the case, then you cannot apply for that particular judgment. Then we have the very famous Attorney General versus FTJ Chiluba and Others 2007. This was decided by the High Court. The principles that are there in the case are the ones that have been talked about in the Act. So we have issues of reciprocity. Of course, contrary to the Nyendea's principle, reciprocity is the determining factor in the recognition of a foreign judgment. The High Court does not have jurisdiction to recognize and impose foreign judgments in the absence of a statutory order to extend the jurisdiction. The latter was not present, thus enforcement was declared to be not enforceable. So in this particular case, you'd find that all the principles were checked out. Every principle was checked out. Everything was checked out. It was a money judgment, it was final and conclusive, it was enforceable, and all of those things. But the only thing that was not present is that there was no extension that was made to England, because this particular decision was made against former President Chiluba in England. Yes, so the authorities in England tried to extend the enforcement of the judgment here in Zambia. Everything else checked out. It was final and conclusive. It was an enforceable judgment. The judgment was for a sum of money. It was not involving issues of personal status, and the deciding court had jurisdiction to handle the matter. But the one thing that was remaining was the extension of the jurisdiction of the High Court. So because there was no extension of the jurisdiction of the High Court, this particular court case failed. And thus, there was no enforcement against Chiluba, even though it is recorded in the history books that he was in fact liable and responsible for the various claims that were made in the Chiluba case. So if you look at these particular issues that we've addressed here, and you look at what is provided for and prescribed in the Act, it is one and the same thing. This is why I was saying it is better you have the Chiluba case, or you either have the Chiluba case or you have your Act. It is talking to the one and the same thing. And you can try to maneuver around the issues of citation of cases. Even, in fact, you can even cite the Chiluba case when you're explaining the principles in the Act, and you can clearly show how this particular case is in line with the Act. Of course, contrasting it with the Nyandea Supuna case. So this is recognition and enforcement of foreign judgment. It's a very, very short topic, but it speaks volumes to conflict of laws. And as we have come to the end of this particular session and the course in itself, I wish you the very best of luck in your examinations. And I am hoping that you are geared for conflict of laws. And if for all there are further questions, this is why we're here. I'm here to help, and you may reach out to me at any given time so that we can now discuss private international law, as you are now competent to have the discussion. Thank you so much and have a blessed day.